with 6 minutes each. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witness, for coming. You oversaw the seed fund, which the Auditor General found was essentially illegal outside of the contribution agreements. In other words, the fence posts that the government set up that allowed the spending of taxpayer dollars at STTC. Who created the seed fund? Whose idea was it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. The seed fund was a funding stream that was established in 2019. And so the strategic direction for the foundation was set by the board, and then the funding stream was established under that direction.
Thank you. And then, so the board set it up, and the board members selected as the screening mechanism for a lot of those projects companies they either sat on the board and are chaired, like the Visharan Center. Is that correct?
So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there was approximately 85 different partners that STTC worked with. And so those partners would nominate companies for funding. And then those nominations would go through an eligibility screening process. And so a nomination
I've read the documents. That wasn't my question. My question was that you had accelerators set up to review these things. Did you not, like the Visharan Center?
No, it was staff that would review the projects for eligibility. And then had they met the eligibility criteria that was set up for the seed funding stream, the companies would then go forward to a panel of experts that would review them. Then the recommendations would be made to the project review committee. The project review committee would then recommend projects to the board of directors.
Okay. Who did you report to?
I reported to the former CEO, Leah Lawrence.
So you worked then in parallel with the current acting COO, whatever they're calling him, Zaid, the former or VP of Investments?
Sorry, is that a question?
Yeah. So you worked with parallel? Is that correct?
Oh, yes, yes. So Ziad Rameh was my peer, and he held the role of Vice President Investment.
Right. So there are a number of emails when the consideration was being put forward for $6.8 million for the Visharan Center from the board. There are a number of emails from him to the team, which I think includes you, fast-tracking their application. In fact, on July 30th, 2021, the subject says, Visharan Center request to fast-track proposal. So who would have told him to fast-track that proposal? So, oh gosh. So I guess your question is, who would have told him to fast-track? I would expect, I'm trying to remember because I know Ziad addressed this at the committee before. So there's about 6 steps in the application process. So a fast track would be that the information collected on the project was sufficient and they didn't need to gather additional information on the project. He makes the determination to fast track it. That would be the decision of the Vice President Investment, would agree to fast track it. But it doesn't necessarily mean the project moves faster through the approval process. It just means that there's sufficient information to proceed to the next step. Fair enough. So the Visharan Center was turned down for obvious conflicts of interest. It's shocking to me that it ever made it anywhere, even through a consideration process. It was turned down. But the same Vice President, in a letter in January 2022, said that they would use staff at STTC to find money elsewhere in the government. Do you think it's the right thing it was the right thing for the employees of STTC to essentially be the business development arm, finding government money for a center which was set up by the chair of the board? It's my understanding that the Visharan Center asked STTC to not support them in finding any additional funding streams after their project was denied. Not what happened. It was never fun. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened. According
to the Vice President of Investments, yes, they did, in fact, help find them almost $11 million. Was that a regular occurrence where board member companies were being used or helped by staff to find other government funding for their projects?
So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I worked with a team of ecosystem leads, and their mandate was to support
Well, yes or
companies
no.
in
It's a simple yes or
accessing-
no. I don't need a repeat of your opening remarks. Yes or no. Did board member companies that they had investments in regularly use the staff of STTC to find other government money for their companies? Yes or no?
So what I was trying to answer is that the team at STTC always put support for companies as the primary focus of the work that they did. If that meant a company was not a fit for STTC's mandate, they would make recommendations based on their knowledge of the ecosystem of other places where companies could go to receive funding. So that was part of the work that the ecosystems team would do.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Mr. Perkins. Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés, vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés, you have 6 minutes. Good morning, Ms. Colbert. Thank you for being with us today. You have a reputation among some former employees in terms of managing public funds, as well as a way in which you interacted with your employees that is not necessarily positive. So let's go directly to specific allegations, and I'd like to have true answers, please, because I don't have a lot of time. The Auditor General reported that at least 2 projects in her sample were not eligible for the Ecosystem Fund. One of them was the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology one. So if we look closer at that project, there are a lot of things that don't work at all. So not only is this project ineligible, on top of that, the consultant who practically wrote the application, Mr. Chris Wormold, was then paid by STTC, therefore with public funds, to approve the application that he himself wrote. So you are the director of this fund, you approved it, and you made sure that this this was funded. So what do you say about that, please?
So what I'll say is that there were 2 projects that were approved by the former board of directors, including the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology. I was asked by the former CEO to conduct due diligence on an application that STTC received.
Madame Colbert, ma question était très précise. Comment tolérer...
Ms. Colbach, my question was specific. How do you tolerate that an external consultant wrote the application, and it even says it in them that Mr. Chris Arnold had helped them with the process, and that you then gave him the same mandate, $10,000 to assess his own application? It's a very specific question, and I'm not asking you to review the whole Ecosystem Fund. So how did you, as the director of the Ecosystem Fund, tolerate this kind of conflict of interest within your own team?
So I would have received the application from the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology from the former CEO, and I was asked to conduct due diligence on that application with my team. The mandate of that project was to develop capacity amongst Indigenous entrepreneurs, as the foundation had not received any applications from companies led by Indigenous entrepreneurs. And the mandate of the project was to support.
Excusez-moi, Madame Colbach, vous ne répondez...
I'm sorry, Ms. Colbach, you're not answering the question. You asked Chris Arnold to do this assessment, to do an external one, which is mandated by the contribution agreement, and it was even mentioned in the application. And so I'm not challenging the work of this Institute of Technology. I'm challenging your role. So I'm going to the next question because I'm not getting an answer on this. Next question. The project, the Verschuren project, you were part of the team that was mandated to follow up this stream, so there wasn't the possibility of having an online application. So you chose this project as a possible one. And when the employees raised their doubts about conflicts of interest, you said to them, and there were several people in the room, that you had done the necessary verifications with the board and the government, and that the conflicts were settled. However, when this project came up, well, then certain board members said, well, no, there's a clear conflict of interest. We cannot approve this project. So did you therefore lie to your employees, Ms. Colbuck?
I would always speak the truth to my employees. So for this project, there was a perceived conflict of interest with the former chair. That conflict would be adjudicated by the former board of directors, and it was, and the project never was approved for funding.
Donc, je répète ma question.
So I repeat my question. When the employees raised the potential conflicts of interest, you mentioned, and there were several people in the room who heard this, who testified to this, and who can say this, that you told them that you had done the necessary due diligence and that there was no conflict of interest. Everything was fine. So the board rejected the project because there was such a flagrant conflict of interest. It's normal that the board would have said, look, there's a problem here. So, first of all, you presented this thing to the board as if there was no conflict of interest. But on top of that, you said to your employees who had raised doubts that there was no conflict of interest, that you had done the necessary verification. So how do you explain that? I need an answer. I've asked you several questions, so please answer it. You haven't answered several of mine. How could you justify saying to your employees that you had done this verification? Were you wrong? Did you dream that you had done this? Because it seems very contradictory with the testimony of several people who were in the room when you said that you had done the due diligence about the conflict of interest.
I'm going to answer your question to the best of my ability. I don't know what meeting you might be talking about, so it's hard for me to verify what someone claims that I have said. Can share is that if there was a potential conflict of interest with the board of directors, it would be adjudicated by the board of directors. If the board had made a decision to fund that project, I would have been responsible in my role.
Attendez, vous êtes en train de me dire que les exécutants.
So you're telling me that the executives of STTC have no obligation to follow the guidelines on the conflict of interest, that it's up to the board to decide if that's the case? Because it's your responsibility. I'm telling you, you're paid with public funds. It's your responsibility to ensure that there is no conflict of interest in the projects that you are funding, that you are responsible for. You are a senior official. It's not up to the board to decide, it's you.
So the Auditor General has highlighted that there were gaps in the governance and oversight of the Foundation in the management of conflict of interest. As the Foundation, we've accepted all of those recommendations, have put them in place, and are following those procedures as well. And they certainly have strengthened the management of conflict of interest within the Foundation.
Et voilà, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.